A pixelated Napoleon in a wool bicorn stands on a cracked cobblestone rise, while a phalanx of creepers in miniature hats hisses expectantly behind him, TNT carts clanking like cavalry saddles. He slaps a map made of item frames and points with a bone-white baton. Advance. And the green line surges forward in a chorus of suspiciously patriotic fizzes. Even the sun is squared in this theater, a bright yellow block that casts hard, jaunty shadows across the battlefield. The camera pulls back to reveal the muster, a valley of chunked cliffs, banners of dyed wool snapping, villagers peeking like disapproving audience members. Napoleon's boots click on cobbles, each click a drumbeat in a soundtrack that alternates between triumphant brass and a cheeky xylophone. This is Minecraft as memoir. Redstone ingenuity, meticulous hat placement, and the peculiar terror of stepping into the wrong block. His bicorn is wool. His baton of bones snagged from a skeleton's blocky ankle. His posture is absolute conviction. The creeper battalion rounds its square shoulders. Green cylinders with stubby legs, tiny hats wobbling like proud baubles. Some wear chest plates enchanted to delay detonation. One sports a monocle, another, inexplicably, a monocle and top hat. A redstone contraption hums beneath the parade ground. TNT carts click on powered rails like restless cavalry. A villager quartermaster, spectacles low, alphabetizes gunpowder because even living bombs require a ledger training, is a montage in low resolution. Synchronized hissing, timed whistles, the awkward grace of creepers learning formations. They practice stopping a pixel's breadth from a piglin, detonating only at a whistle, forming wedges and the ceremonial square of seclusion. A skeleton sergeant whistles with a bone flute. Discipline, or you explode the parade. Napoleon teaches like a geometry tutor. Choke points, impulse vectors, timed redstone pulses that turn hisses into strategy. He taps the item frame map. A square fortress, a narrow bridge, 2 rails and a button. 2 creepers, 1 synchronized push, he says. Supply lines are absurdly domestic. Donkey caravans, skin-trimmed banners reading a LAVICTOIRE. A smithy where golems weld silica dampers. At night, the camp glows, distant hisses punctuate lantern-lit drill. A nervous recruit leans close to Napoleon. Not yet. Every meeting ends with a small ritual. A glowstone block placed on the map, a promise of careful brilliance. There is comedy. Pigs derail carts, banners get too square, a creeper hiccups mid-salute and singes 3 tents, prompting ceremonial distance. There is warmth. Veterans with patchwork scars refuse to detonate before seeing their young graduate drills fizzle. Day is celebrated with dye-stained wool confetti. Twist. The creepers have customs. Barbers trim spikes. Lullabies sound like ticking redstone. And they gossip about human generals who try to civilize them. Napoleon becomes oddly sentimental. He honors fallen creepers with small obelisks, listens to their nicknames, lets them name formations. Yet a question tugs. Can a commander of explosions practice restraint? He studies a pool where his pixels soften, Imaginees' lives reduced to lootable spins. The contrast between his geometry and their living joy makes a moral chessboard. He composes orders like sonnets, aware of absurdity. The muster closes. Napoleon stands atop the rise, the item frame map aglow, the green line eager. Behind him, hats wobble, a stray creeper sneezes confetti, and the platoon laughs in synchronous hissing. He taps the baton for a heartbeat. His face is open. Not just a conqueror, but a man who knows the thrill and the danger of his troops' enthusiasm. The green line surges. Napoleon's eyes narrow with a plan, half geometry, half mischief. He whispers, almost private, "We must be brilliant and careful." The camera lingers on the map as a small redstone torch blinks at the valley's edge unseen. Something unreadable stirs. The next move will demand improvisation where blocks refuse to be obedient. The stage is set. Part 2 awaits. Before the march, a muster of personalities parades. A named lieutenant, Green General Petty Fizz, paces with a tiny saber, clicking like a metronome. Petty Fizz is more than a prop. He has a scarred flank of mismatched pixels and a reputation for theatrical charges that end in polite apologies. He practices a bow that is half salute, half imminent explosion. And the camp applauds because they know the difference between drama and disaster. A scout returns with news. The enemy has installed a string of pressure plates covered in leaves, designed to trigger a chain reaction of unexpected eruptions. Napoleon squints at the item frames. He counts squares like a chess master, then nods and sketches a diversion with a flint and steel. They set up decoy rails, a noisy parade of pig riders, and a single, very theatrical creeper who moonlights as a mime to draw attention away. That creeper, wearing stage makeup of extra green dyes, practices exaggerated sneezes until a rival traitor applauds and trips a plate by accident. The chain fizzles harmlessly into a field of hay bales. The plan works, and the camp erupts in tiny, hysterical cheers. But there are misfires. A beloved mascot creeper named Puff mistakes a ceremonial drumroll for a countdown and nearly commits to a surprise solo. The moment stretches in pixel-slow suspense. Napoleon, with theatrical calm, steps forward and whispers, "Now." Puff chooses not to explode and merely performs a gentlemanly curtsy that leaves a small, polite crater. The crowd laughs and cries at once in this world. Comedy and catastrophe share a thin, combustible seam. Diplomacy runs parallel to sabotage. Napoleon sends 2 tuxedoed creepers and a villager with a sugarcane bow to parley with Endermen and wandering traders. The talks are surreal. Endermen stare. A trader offers enchanted saddle discounts. They swap wool colors and agree not to mine the central beacon on Wednesdays. Back at camp, Napoleon contemplates consequences. He measures destruction in neat rows of rubble like a taxman counting receipts. He composes orders with the tenderness of someone arranging flowers, aware that his troops' very nature resists sympathy. In a quieter scene, he honors a fallen creeper with an obelisk carved from smooth stone, and the camp stands in mute, pixelated reverence. These moments humanize a strategy built of explosions, sentimental and strategic. They sit uneasily together. The final evening before departure, the sky is a grid of stars, lanterns bob, and the camp hums with rehearsed bravery. Napoleon checks his baton, straightens his wool by corn, and for once allows himself a smile that is equal parts strategy and affection. He whispers to Petty Fizz, "We will be precise," and the lieutenant replies in a clipped hiss of honor. As dawn breaks, the green line moves, carts roll, the valley listens. At the ridge, a single redstone torch pulses tomorrow's problem and waits unapologetically today. The dawn broke like a green torch over the pixel horizon, and Napoleon Bonaparte, tiny in scale, but vast in ambition, bicorn hat squared over a square jaw, surveyed an impossible parade ground of blocky grass. The camera of imagination pulls in tight, his silhouette cape snapping in Minecraft wind, a line of creepers stretching like verdant topiary. This is not a museum tableau. It is a mustering ground, and the hiss is the new anthem, Napoleon's. Eyes, which in any other world had studied maps and weathered continental winters, now considered hisses and fuses. He tapped a magnifying glass that somehow fit over a pixelated map of the overworld. Contours were cubes, rivers were blue staircases. He traced routes with a redstone stick, his finger leaving luminous dust. Each trail ended in a tiny skull icon, potential explosion points. He smiled the way generals smile when a plan has the right amount of audacity and the wrong amount of common sense. Scene shift. The creepers. They gathered like a botanical army, 4 block tall, green-mottled hides glinting with dew. Some sniffed the air, some rocked nervously, one attempted to roll forward like an oversized marble. Napoleon walked among them, his boots clicking on cobblestone, and the camera caught the absurd intimacy of it. A human-sized Napoleon leaning down to whisper to a creature whose default state was catastrophic silence. he said into the organized chaos. It landed as a comic beat, not so much a rebuke as a treaty offer. The creepers responded with a chorus of tentative hisses, like a chamber orchestra tuning before an apocalypse symphony. One small creeper, evidently ambitious, hissed too loudly and glanced guiltily at the emperor. Napoleon raised a gloved hand, and the whole line stilled. Each face, flat and uncanny in the early light training, began with discipline invented for things designed to self-terminate. Napoleon introduced collars, ornate, blocky collars made of dyed leather and redstone, meant to moderate fuse length. Engineers from a nearby village rolled carts of redstone, piston clamps, and leather strips. Villagers in aprons bent like tiny, patient machinists, adjusting each collar with concentrated frowns. The collars buzzed faintly when the creeper's mood changed. One collar blinked blue. Napoleon regarded it the way a chess master studies a pawn that just learned to castle beat change. Formations. The emperor loved geometry, it was his comfort. He ordered squares and columns, instructing the creepers on the art of standing still. He drew diagrams on a dirt chalkboard with a stick: column, square, enveloping crescent. Creepers are bad at staying calm, but excellent at making statements. Napoleon adapted tactics to temperament. Square formation for defense, channeling for shock staggered intervals to avoid chain reactions. At first, when told to hold, creepers held like new recruits, fidgeting. Then the commander introduced music. A line of note blocks was set up, each producing a different chime. Napoleon wielded a baton of polished birch and tapped a cadence that somehow soothed an explosive species. The sound was ridiculous, tinny and precise, but it worked. Creepers swung their bodies to the rhythm, heads bobbing almost with military pride. One particularly susceptible creeper hummed a melody that shortened its fuse, an alarming but effective discipline. Napoleon nodded, as if discovering artillery had a pulse-short comic aside. A black cat wandered through the ranks and froze a half-dozen creepers mid-hiss. The animal blinked smugly. Napoleon paused, considered domestication tactics, and then ordered a detachment of cat handlers. Cats became mobile pacifiers. Wherever a cat prowled, creepers calmed. The emperor patented the phrase feline diplomacy. It read well on banners. Logistics took on a moral twist. Supply wagons clattered in, gunpowder barrels stacked in satisfying pixel-perfect cubes, stacks of TNT labeled in ugly block letters, and sacks of gunpowder carefully sealed. Napoleon inspected them with the gravity of a man in front of an essential paradox: to deploy an explosive force without losing his own tactical sense. He devised storage vaults, blast-resistant barrels made of obsidian and reinforced oak. Each barrel had a ceremonial tag, for use only under Napoleon's order. The villagers rolled their eyes. It felt ceremonial and sane at the same time. The battalion also needed horses. Horses in Minecraft are proud, skittish, and slightly rectangular. Napoleon, who had once ridden through dusted European plains, now mounted a pixel steed named Marengo II. The horse had enchanted iron horseshoes and an annoyed expression in its blocky eye. When Napoleon paraded past, the creepers straightened, as if British cavalry were approaching. He addressed them from horseback with an austere calm. His voice was small but commanding, like a flute calling cannons to a tension twist. Some creepers refused to be regimented. They were artful, poetic, prone to sudden sonnets of hissing that concluded in an accidental puff. Napoleon created a classified roster: the reliable, the restless, the romantic, and the rogue. The rogue was particularly mischievous. It liked to weave through legs and trigger pratfalls. Napoleon tried to shake hands with it once. The rogue responded by emitting a tiny, shocked sigh, not a detonation. The emperor laughed aloud, a full, surprised laugh, which sounded strange against the hiss chorus. The laugh was sincere. He admired unpredictable soldiers' history, had taught him to value eccentricity. Scene transition. Drills became theater. Napoleonic commands were matched with redstone choreography. Piston gates opened like mouths dispensers spat out cardboard decoys. A line of iron golems stood guard, their chests emblazoned with the imperial crest. The golems tried to be gentle, but sometimes a golem's fist met a creeper's edge and the ground trembled. To avoid disaster, Napoleon introduced slow marches across pressure plates that triggered Nafusa footwear. His staff included a scowling engineer who muttered about programming temperament, as if mood swings could be debugged. There were moments of unexpected tenderness. At sunset, Napoleon walked the line, removing loose pebbles from a creeper's foot. The creature tasted the interspecies kindness with a hesitant hiss like a thank you. He read from a tiny book of battlefield maxims: improvise, adapt, exploit terrain, and the one he added himself, never trust a red wool hat. The book fluttered in a breeze that smelled of oak smoke and wet stone humor threaded through everything. A detachment of creepers was taught semaphore with tail-like stems, another cohort wore tiny heraldic capes, stitched by villagers. The emperor commissioned regimental banners, green embroidered with a golden bee, and made sure each banner pole had a lightning rod on top to avoid unwanted electrical enthusiasm from thunderstorms. He took the threat of weather seriously. Cloud cover changed temperament, bright sun made creepers sluggish, rain made them dangerously lively. Napoleon consulted a weather map on which clouds were cubes of wool, and he scheduled maneuvers accordingly. A surprising ally arrived. A skeleton lieutenant with a bone-white grin and a talent for cover fire. The skeleton's arrows were precise, it wore an embroidered sash, and had apparently taken to leadership after a minor reanimation crisis. Napoleon welcomed the archer with a tilt of the hat and arranged combined arms drills. Creepers advanced, skeletons suppressing from behind, and the emperor directing like a conductor at the front. The result was oddly elegant, and smelled faintly of gunpowder and hay as night fell, and torches speckled like constellations. The muster wound down into quiet inspection. Napoleon looked over his battalion with the same intensity he once used to command kings. He saw potential, risk, loyalty, and mischief braided together. He also saw the inherent absurdity, a corseted genius of continental conquest, trying to harness an anarchic species whose everyday hobby was accidental demolition. He folded. His map tapped a redstone crystal, and for a moment allowed himself an imperial fantasy. The perfect campaign, executed with geometric precision and a little feline diplomacy. The camera pulls back as lanterns blink, and the hisses become lullabies. But as the night deepened, somewhere beyond the line of torches, a small rogue creeper tried to sing and ended the verse with a tiny, regretful puff of smoke. Napoleon sniffed it like a general smelling difference in the wind and cradled the paradox in his hands. Military genius meets biological anarchy. The next move, he thought, and the viewers feel the leap, would have to reconcile strategy with temperament, order with entropy. The muster had succeeded in form, but not in the deeper calculus. Napoleon turned his gaze to the dark horizon, where mountains cut the blocky sky into jagged teeth, and planned to teach an explosive species to be patient. It was, he decided, a most delightful problem. Imagine a square dawn over a blocky plain where Napoleon Bonaparte, bicorn awkwardly pixelated, stood on a hay bale and addressed a battalion of hissing green cylinders. The title is ridiculous and obvious. Would Napoleon win if he commanded a creeper battalion? Here, the question was being answered in fluorescent green and comic seriousness. The wind smelled of pixel grass. Hisses echoed with a stereo rhythm. Every 20 seconds, the camera cut. A new visual like a filmic 20-second beat. He tapped a map made of smaller maps. Redstone Claude stood on his pixels, unfurled schematics of TNT and pressure plates. Villager banners flapped, green wool with a crude fleur-de-lis. Napoleon liked symbols. He liked geometry. He liked order first, identity. Creepers explode hats. They also explode feelings. Napoleon insisted on sashes, blue and white, tied with iron pins. A sash once gave a comical puff of dust and a wobble of dirt. Napoleon pretended not to notice. He took notes in a tiny ledger, quill and netherwort sprig second. Drill, thick blocky legs learned cadence. The formation went left, left, hiss right, step, hiss. Training grounds were a checkerboard of sand and grass so blasts remained tidy. Redstone Fior ran timers. He taught counting. 1, 2, 3, boom. The creepers learned to hush and time their breaths. Napoleon invented formations. The crescent of surprise, the starburst, the oblique explosive column. Each shape was drawn in squares. He compared patterns like a man admiring a tapestry. Morale was peculiar. Creepers enjoyed solitude, suddenness, and awkward parenting. Mothers hissed at conscription. A creeper poet offered a haiku. Green night, square moon, do I explode for glory or for tune? Napoleon staged parades. Villagers made banners with stylized explosions. We are not mere noise, he pronounced. A creeper muttered purpose. In a faint hiss, whistles were introduced. Bone blocks with redstone bits became signals. 1 whistle, assemble. 2 hold. 3 engage. The first rehearsal misfired. 17 creepers hugged a chest of apples instead of a lining. Napoleon sighed, then adapted. He learned that apples' distracted dot containment solved aesthetic and practical problems. Obsidian pens and glass enclosures let blasts be sampled. Inside, block fragments hung as a slow-motion mosaic. Redstone Claude logged blast signatures, calling them explosion fingerprints. Napoleon compared them like vintage's dot innovation arrived as collar craft. Fior devised a wool collar soaked in water that softened the panic hiss. Calm collars, they called them. Little scarves muffled panic and allowed timed detonations. The muffled ticking spread like a cautious heartbeat across the plane. Glitches appeared. L'artiste the creeper performed mid-air pirouettes and exploded into confetti. Napoleon tolerated flamboyance if the supply depot remained intact. Another creeper refused to detonate, citing existential dread. It became a mascot, asking SSS, but why? Napoleon wrote more drills. Supply was cumbersome. TNT is precious and fragile. Villagers forged charges, wrapped them with red straps, and sent minecarts down a conveyor. The sequence of carts, chests, and creepers looked like an iron river. Napoleon admired the choreography. Mock battles taught selection. Golems and skeletons served as targets. Creepers learned to choose, strike armor, spare saplings. Once, a rehearsal turned tragicomic. A flock of sheep became vapor and wool clumps. Villagers demanded reparations. Napoleon paid in cobblestone and murmured apologies. Night training sharpened edges. Under a square moon, creepers glowed faint. Shadows carved geometry. A stray flint spark sent a ripple of panic. One detonated. Because they held formation, the blast rode the grid and trimmed a hedgerow into a series of perfect cubes. The crowd cheered, awkward and relieved. Napoleon clapped, as if it had been the plan by muster's end. The plane resembled a catalog of peculiar military cosmetics. Rows of green with scarves, flags fluttering in blocky gusts, obsidian pens, minecarts like iron beads. Napoleon measured success with a pixel ruler. He had diagrams, notches, and a roster of preferences. Still, a doubt pricked at him. Training arranged behavior but cannot alter essence. A hiss remained a hiss. A fuse, delayed or muffled, still moved toward an ending. Command in a world of blocks required more than geometry. It required imagination. Tomorrow, he said low, and the camera cut to his square profile. Tomorrow we march. A creeper beside him returned a small, hopeful hiss. The montage lingered on banners, on minecarts, on the tiny collars. The assembly sat poised, equal parts spectacular and precarious. This was discipline converted into spectacle, yet he was not without cunning. He held councils in the shade of an acacia tree, consulting with Redstone Claude, Fior, and Marguerite, a villager with blunt common sense. Marguerite suggested camouflaging supply lines with carpet, planting decoy chests, and sewing banners with pockets. Napoleon approved the plan, drew a new diagram, and added a double corridor with concealed alcoves for reserve charges. The drawing looked elegant on the grid. He tested morale in odd rituals. A ceremonial tea was convened, a table, a suspicious stew, and chorus flowers. Creepers attended with the dignity of prisoners. Napoleon watched who laughed, who fidgeted, who would rather charge. He learned his Menfior engineered a chain of daylight sensors that staged a slow wave of hisses at dawn. Redstone Claude built an acoustic board that swelled tiny sibilants into a war chorus. The sound was unnerving, majestic, and strangely useful diplomacy intervened. A skeleton envoy arrived on a borrowed horse, offering trenches for trade and spider neutrality. Napoleon laughed politely, traded diagrams, and preserved lines. Humor seeped through rehearsal. L'artiste tried a pirouette in midair. A creeper put on a bicorn and nearly exploded from pride. A villager accidentally traded a compass for fireworks. The battalion was delighted by colors. On the eve, Napoleon walked the lines, checking collars, smoothing sashes, and whispering to the mascot who refused to detonate. SSS, it asked, plaintive. He smiled, weary. He had arranged potential, not destiny. He had mapped bridges, fallback squares, and supply detours. Minecraft terrain harbors surprises. Cliffs drop into void, rivers freeze, and physics misbehave. He counted contingencies, but felt a kernel of unease. Still, he relished the theater. The ordered ranks looked like a proclamation. Flags fluttered in blocky gusts. Collars shone faintly. He felt the absurd pride of a commander who had made order of chaos. Tomorrow, he said low, and the camera cut to his square profile. Tomorrow we march. A creeper. Beside him returned a small, hopeful hiss. The montage lingered on banners, on minecarts, on the tiny collars. The assembly sat poised, equal parts spectacular and precarious. This was discipline converted into spectacle. Yet, the last beat before morning was not triumph. It was a quiet compression, the tiny pause before a possibility resolves into consequence. Napoleon inhaled and felt a held breath. Explosions like orchestra hits, soft green hisses followed by blocky devastation, announced the muster of Napoleon's creeper battalion, a sight simultaneously majestic and absurd in the Pixelsky dawn. The emperor stood on a wooden crate, a tricorn made of wool perched at a jaunty angle, surveying a valley of grass blocks stitched with paths of cobblestone. Light pixels shivered across a river of glass. The world smelled like rain on dirt and charged TNT. The camera, unseen but felt, cinematic and omniscient, pulled close to his square jaw as he unrolled a map made of banners and redstone dust. This is a documentary of ridiculous consequence. Napoleon Bonaparte, the short, relentless strategist reborn as a blocky general, had one problem and one solution: how to turn the world's most temperamental explosive mobs into an army that obeyed orders. The muster was his experiment, a laboratory of discipline wrapped in hissing green fur. Behind him, rows of creepers waited in formation, their faces like living blobs of moss, each with a uniquely pixelated expression: suspicion, boredom, misplaced elegance. Their tails twitched. The hiss was almost musical scene shift, tight on boots. Napoleon's boots were polished stone with a brass buckle. He tapped the crate twice. A drumbeat answered, a redstone note block, plink-plink, a military metronome. Around the valley, contraptions clinked. Dispensers stacked with carrots on sticks, powered rails, K-Dare decoys, and crates of labeled TNT. The logistical elegance was absurdly thorough. Supply lines ran like braids of rail, with minecarts carrying stacks of wool for uniforms and pumpkins for helmets. A skeleton quartermaster checked manifest with a bone clipboard. Every few sentences, new visual. A creeper attempted to polish its own chest plate, an exercise in futility, but the plate was a carved pumpkin. Another rolled a tiny banner between its paws, impatient. Nearby, a handful learned to stand in precise distances, a chest measuring stick marking a 2-block interval. Napoleon paced. He was both delighted and exasperated. "Precision," he said once, as if testing the acoustics. A single victorious hiss punctuated the word midmuster comedy. One new recruit, a baby creeper with a permanent star pattern on its flank, mistook a silk-touch pickaxe for a flute and began to blow. The sound was a series of desperate hisses, followed by a tiny, embarrassed puff. Napoleon exhaled a laugh that sounded like a map being folded. He signaled a halt and, with surprising tenderness, rearranged the baby into a protective circle. Leadership in a blocky world, he discovered, required petty heroism. The muster also revealed problems of morale and mischief. Creepers were famous for their temperament. Some wanted to explode at the slightest provocation. A fallen leaf, an accidental step on a pressure plate. Napoleon issued rules. Rule 1, no unsanctioned detonation within sight of the general. Rule 2, cover your fuse during mealtime. Rule 3, never explode at a bridge ceremony. The rules were displayed on wooden signs, hand-painted by a suspiciously competent villager artist. Infractions were handled with equal parts tribunal and absurdity. The guilty would be sentenced to perform synchronized patching of nearby holes while wearing banners that read "I misfired" in the corner of the training field. A mysterious crewmate built a contraption, a camouflage of leaves and pistons, that could momentarily mute a creeper's fuse tick. It was a redstone hush. Napoleon stroked his wool hat and approved. This innovation offered a tactical miracle: create a creeping silence to move units into position, and then, with a discrete trigger, let controlled chaos do its work. He rehearsed the timing like a conductor, practicing a new score. The reader, or viewer, learns that Napoleon didn't only teach them how to explode, he taught them when not to. The greatest art of command was restraint. He drilled patience into green hearts. The creepers learned to wait for the signal, to place their hiss precisely, to avoid collateral grief among villagers and pig farms. They trained on mock fortifications made of logs and glass, learning how to collapse watchtowers without toppling the ground beneath them. Each explosion became a curated event. Debris flew in tidy arcs, banners fluttered in pixel-perfect slow motion, and survivor chickens ran through the set like comic relief. Small victories pepper the muster. A skeleton archer of old, now a veteran staff officer, devised a volley system that used skeletons' arrows to trigger plates at distances, synchronizing with detonations to clear gaps in enemy walls. A baker taught creepers to identify edible blocks from structural ones, preventing unnecessary damage to the food supply. A shy Enderman, who had reluctantly attended, proved excellent at hauling TNT into positions with a grace that belied its stilted legs. The world felt assembled by improbable specialists, but no muster is complete without a moment of unexpected emotion. As the sun pixelated lower, Napoleon gathered his battalion in a semicircle. He tipped his tricorn and, with a brief human sigh, addressed them. His voice was part drumbeat, part gravelly map. "We will not merely detonate walls," he said. "We will shatter stratagems, reveal secrets, and if necessary, rebuild what we break." A creeper leaned forward, hissing softly as if to say, "For glory? For snacks?" The general gave no answer but tapped the map a final twist. As night fell, the valley filled with shadows and the distant glow of a hostile player's portal. Something glittered on the horizon, a banner bearing the union of blocks, a rival empire flanked by iron golems. Napoleon did not flinch. Instead, he smiled a tight, tiny smile that made his wool hat seem larger than his ambition. The muster concluded with a strange harmony. Note blocks playing a march while creepers crouched like hedges, cat sentries blinking slowly. The camera pulled back, showing the tiny, precise order amid the sprawling chaos of Minecraft. The conclusion of the muster was not an ending but a hinge. The battalion, disciplined and dangerously adorable, filed into rows. Minecarts awaited like armored carriages. TNT crates were lashed and labeled. Napoleon mounted a blocky steed, a saddle on a pig with armor, and raised his hand in an imperious salute. The valley exhaled, even the trees seemed to brace for a new kind of campaign in the hush before midnight. The narration narrows, intimate, and ridiculous. The question remains alive.